been working a long time on this, so it's super exciting for us. Zadie got to do her first TV interview today. That was awesome. So Zadie's going to start with the part of the presentation, and she's going to be talking about the people that she was most drawn to, and then I'll follow up with some of the history of the other folks. Thanks.
So I'd like to thank you all for being here first off. This is pretty exciting. So my mother and I started working on this book about 2.5 years ago. We wanted to write a book together, a book that would tell really a completely different story about Portland and what was, originally taught and what today's history books teach us. So we all know about the coin toss and the city streets who are named after the men, but we're never taught about the women in history and what they've done for us. So we've mentioned more than 150 women in this book, and I was only ever taught about one of them, and that was Abigail Dunn. I was never even taught specific information. I was always very general. So she was one of probably the most important people in the suffrage movement in Oregon. She was so important that Governor Oswald West had her sign the Oregon's Equal Suffrage Proclamation in 1912, when Oregon became the 9th state to give women the right to vote. As I learned more about these women, I really focused on how, for the longest time, women had very few rights and had to fight hard for very simple rights, such as the right to vote. So our chapter on women of the Progressive Era is full of women who work tirelessly for rights we enjoy today, like free libraries, sanitary food markets, reproductive medicine, citywide trash pickup, anti-discrimination laws, maximum hours laws, minimum pay laws, and minimum age for employment laws. And before those labor laws, factories in Portland would work women and children as very cheap labor until they literally dropped on the factory floors. And before Oregon passed civil rights laws, which was a decade before the rest of the country, people could be excluded from hotels and businesses purely because of the color of their skin. It was inspiring to see so many women working so hard for what they believed in. And I like that we included women from many different walks of life, not just well-known women. I like that we included women with different passions: sports, photography, painting, music, writing, and politics. And I liked how we included women that were a little kooky and marched to the beat of their own drum. It's easy to see that history is messy, and I like to be told the messy and the grand parts of Portland history. I like that we're teaching Portland about its complex racial and ethnic history, and I feel proud that my mother and I are helping tell the stories of many women that Portlanders may be unaware of. In my part of today's presentation, I'm talking about some of the top women that I was drawn to in our book from the very beginning of my research. So the first woman I was drawn to was Lola Baldwin. She was one of the first policewomen in the United States, and she volunteered at institutions for unwed mothers and troubled children. She was part of the efforts of the YWCA to make the 1905 Lewis and Clark Expo safe, and she was a charter member for the Oregon Social Hygienic Society. YWCA partnered with the National Travelers Aid Association with Lola Baldwin as their director, and she protected women from hustlers and criminals at the expo. Along with that, she traveled the country, arguing in favor of more women in police departments and for better protections for young women. From the very beginning of my research, I was very drawn to Lola Baldwin because she pushed past all expected gender barriers, especially so early, and went into a field that was reserved for men until that time. I was very proud of her for becoming the nation's first police officer, and she really inspired women to do the same. The next one was Mary Leonard. She was the first woman admitted as a lawyer to the legal bar, and she fought for women's rights to practice law in the state. In 1878, she spent 11 months in jail because she was accused of murdering her husband, but was acquitted and inherited his estate. See, history is messy. She also gave free legal advice to women in the streets and ran a boarding house which likely catered to them. There is now a Mary Leonard Law Society for women attorneys. I thought she was pretty gutsy in giving free legal advice to women down on their luck. And she had a reputation for being amazing in court, but also had a reputation for hard drinking. She worked hard to be Oregon's first woman attorney. Grace Phelps was the chief nurse at the University of Oregon Medical School unit in France in World War I. She also founded the Oregon Nurses Association and organized nursing services for the Portland Red Cross Center. I wanted to talk about Grace Phelps because I was very interested in World War I, how women often worked as nurses, and how Grace Phelps worked in France. She's shown in this picture with nurses from Good Samaritan in 1917. The school still operates in Northwest Portland as Linfield College. And my next person, Sarah Barfield, was a women's suffrage leader, and made a 5,000-mile automobile journey from coast to coast to hand-deliver a petition to President Woodrow Wilson in 1915. And the petition had 500,000 signatures asking for the women's rights to vote. She also wrote several books, was a Portland poet, and is known for her controversial relationship with C.E.S. Wood. She really caught my eye because of her drive, literally. And also, my next person, Kathleen Rockwell, created her signature dance called the Flame Dance that included an intricate dress and 200 feet of red chiffon. She did this dance to entertain gold miners coming for the Klondike Gold Rush. However, it soon became so famous that she started traveling around the country to perform her dance. Once she retired from dancing, however, she homesteaded 320 acres. She was often spotted doing hard work on the land while wearing her dancing gowns and high-heeled shoes. She's very intriguing to me because she was a very bold lady and really quite a character. It's amazing to me that she figured out a way to make it in the gold mining male-dominated Wild West. My next person, Hazel Ying Lee, was a licensed pilot during World War II and joined the Women's Air Force Service Pilots, or WASP. Before that, however, she had a very hard time finding a job because of both her gender and race. She was a Chinese American. When she joined WASP, she became the first Chinese American woman to fly for the U.S. military. She and other women pilots in WASP flew the planes from the factories where they were made to the military bases where they would be used in the war. It was not only nearly impossible for a Chinese American person to get a decent job at that time, but less than 1% of the women were pilots. However, she died at age 32 in a mid-air collision because of air traffic control errors. Of the 1,102 women who took part in the program, 38 died, and Hazel was among them. Most of them died because of defects in their planes, and they did very dangerous work. She was inspirational to me because being the first Chinese American woman pilot for the U.S. military is really quite an accomplishment, and I think it's brave that she was a pilot when so few were at the time. And my next person, Mary Frances Issam. If you love our beautiful Central Library, if you've ever even been there, you have Mary Frances Issam to thank for it. She was the founder of many library commissions and associations, and she helped open Oregon's first free public library. She drafted legislation for Oregon's public libraries and opened many Carnegie-funded library branches. She even served troops overseas in World War I as a nurse, visiting 93 American hospitals in France. I thought it was really interesting that she not only helped open the first public library in Oregon, but she was also a nurse for the war. Also, I'm definitely a bookworm, so Issam really speaks to me. Because of all her help, Central Library has put up a plaque about her, and I really hope you can visit it sometime. Again, my next person, Dorothea Lynch. And if you've ever seen a concert at Washington Park, or gone to a soccer game in one of Portland's parks, know that Dorothea Lynch was the one who started these types of recreational activities in Portland parks. She was Portland's first recreation director for the parks and developed many different programs. As part of her job, she was one of the first people in Oregon to actively promote sports activities for girls. She really caught my eye because it was really interesting that women didn't have sports opportunities and that Dorothea Lynch helped women to access these sports. She did this for 3.5 decades and changed opportunities for many Portland women. In these photos, there's a 1949 women's softball game with Betty Turner at the bat. There's a 1956 women's exercise class that's called Reaching for Glamour, and there are children in a wading pool in the 1950s. Dorothea Lynch also founded the Children's Museum and was a founder of the Portland Opera Guild, Chamber Music Northwest, and the Japanese Gardens. Catherine Hall Bogle was a journalist and civil rights activist who wrote an article for the Oregonian called An American Negro Speaks of Color in 1937. This very important article described the harsh realities of being black in Portland and was the first time the Oregonian paid an African-American journalist to write an article. While Portland may be a pretty liberal bubble now, it wasn't a very great place to be for black people at the time. Bogle helped found the Friends of Golden West to get historical status for the Golden West Hotel. This was the first local hotel to allow African-American patrons and was a social hub for the African-American community. Catherine Hall Bogle was a member of the Portland NAACP and was the founder of Portland's Links Incorporated. In 1993, she received the Lifetime Achievement Award by the Portland Association of Black Journalists. She promoted equality through educational and civic activities and really inspired me. Grace Wick was very kooky. She's known for being a really interesting character. She was affected by the Depression and was put out of work. So she became a main spectacle for 3 decades and protested around Portland about President Roosevelt's relief programs, old age assistance, the New Deal, and other topics. She could sometimes be seen in a barrel with her political opinions taped to the side. I liked her because she was quirky and a little bit crazy, but she stuck to her ideals until she dropped. She literally protested until she dropped. Betty Cantrell Roberts was the first woman on the Oregon Supreme Court, and she worked to change laws that discriminated against ethnic minorities and women. She was also the first woman on the Oregon Court of Appeals and served in the Oregon House of Representatives, the Oregon Senate, and was a co-sponsor of the nation's first bottle bill. She helped pass Oregon's first legalized right to abortion and was involved with the state's ratifications of the Equal Rights Amendment. She was also the recipient of many awards and published her autobiography in 2008, With Grit and by Grace. She's possibly one of the most inspiring women for me because she achieved so much at a time when women, as said in her biography, could not keep their own name or stay in a motel alone. Marie Newberger was the only Oregon woman to serve on the United States Senate, the first and only. She got that spot when her husband died just after being elected to the Senate. Many hoped Governor Mark Hatfield would appoint her to the position, but he declined, so she ran for the spot and was elected in the same year, 1960. She advocated for a ban on colored margarine and sponsored legislation that would have given equal pay for both men and women. Newberger served on the Presidential Commission on the Status of Women after being nominated by President John F. Kennedy. She inspired me because she really smashed a very big glass ceiling election to the United States Senate and the only woman senator from Oregon ever. And my last person, Janice Scruggs, was a huge part of Portland's blues, gospel, and jazz communities and contributed to many critically acclaimed albums. She was inducted into the Cascade Blues Association Hall of Fame in 1992 and the Oregon Music Hall of Fame in 2013. She stunned audiences with her incredible skill as a pianist and was featured at many jazz and blues festivals and the 10 Grand Piano Concerts in Portland and Seattle. One of her former students was Esperanza Spalding, a Grammy winner. She said that her teacher unifies completely the sound of gospel, blues, and jazz, our American roots music. What I loved about her was her passion for music. So here's a little taste of her piano playing as she accompanies Linda Hornbuckle on a Bessie Smith song.
I hate to see
intrigued by the women that Zadie chose. I thought that was an interesting list. I loved it, and we had a lot of conversations about why did you choose this person, so that's why I thought our focus should be that. So tonight, all the proceeds are actually for the entire length of the book, all the proceeds from book sales will benefit homeless women in crisis at Transition Projects, Inc. So I've already taken some flack on social media for women I didn't include. And I wanted to point out that the book is 98% historical. There are very few contemporary women. We really think of this as the beginning of a conversation. And we encourage anyone who wants to dig in to keep having the conversation and explore more women's stories. The publisher has a very strict format. It's 127 pages. It's a picture history, and they only allow 75 words per caption. That is excruciating to write a woman's entire life history in 75 words. I do believe it's made me a better writer because you have to pack in a lot of original research and original history. But my point is that there's a lot more work to be done, and this book isn't claiming at all to be definitive. Is Norm Golston here tonight? I think he had a fever when I last spoke to him. Norm Golston is the quietest, most unassuming guy. You wouldn't even know that his house is a giant archive of pictures and books and ephemera that he's been collecting at yard sales and estate sales and online for 60 years, 50 years. And his father collected before him, and he inherited his father's works. Every book I've done on Portland history has his work, his photographs in there, and I could not do it without him. Oregon Historical Society, if we have anybody feeling like donating, they charge $75 per picture, so I end up not using very many of their photographs. Norm gives them to me for free, and I can just thank him. So he does an incredible service. And we had, this book includes photographs from many different archives around the state. The really interesting thing for us, and I want to thank my husband, Scott Schaffer. You want to wave at, he's in the very back. Wave at everybody. And my son, Bryce Schaffer. And every one of my Portland books have the Easter eggs of the fact that when historians take pictures of contemporary things, it's really boring to have a picture of just a building. So I stick my family in every time. So look for them in all of my books. So another thing is we used Mrs. in the book occasionally because we literally couldn't find the women's first names. If they were called Mrs. John Doe, and I can't find any historical record, then her first name is lost forever. So when you see that, that's what that means. Our book gives a glimpse into many parts of Portland history, and often we don't know the names of the women, but we thought that it was important to tell the stories of Native American women before and after Portland was incorporated in 1851. We can't name them, we don't know their names. Women who worked on the home front in World War I and World War II, whose names we often don't know. Women at Vietnam protests, etc. So we have over 150 women, but we also have a lot more than that of women whose names no one will ever know. So I'll take you through the chapters quickly. This is an 1841 George Catlin illustration, and I purposely cropped the man out of the photo. There's a man standing right next to her with a blanket. And I wanted you to focus on the woman with the baby on her back in the cradle board. And I've been doing 10 years of research on the forgotten Native American history of Portland. I often give these talks at Multnomah County libraries and other places. No Portland history book tells Native American story as this book does. Because I was able to, it'll be years before I finish the research to do the book on the forgotten Native American history of Portland. So I threw in as much research as I could into this book because I need it out in print. I need people to understand It's a much more complex story than we know. We're still teaching a manifest destiny version of history in Portland Public Schools. We're still teaching it as if white people arrived to nothingness and then they settled the place. This book disrupts that dramatically. For 10,000 years, when Native people have a history in this region, in Portland proper, they were mostly Chinookan people. It would have been pronounced with a hard T at the beginning of the word, Chinook, instead of Chinook as it's pronounced today. And the bands that were Chinookan people were the Multnomah, the Cascade, and the Clackamas, who were in Portland proper. But many other tribal people passed through here, would stay here for 2 or 3 months seasonally. So it is not just that tribal history. You can go to the Portland Art Museum and you can see these artifacts. These were called Indian relics. And I found many Oregonian newspaper articles talking about how they were stacked up outside of a pioneer's home, turned up by plowing and available to anyone who would haul them away. These are really amazing artifacts, the carvings, but also the fact that women used everything in this picture for food making. And so they would pound wapato and camas roots and salmon and dry it later and use it for use later or to trade. The photograph on the left is a basket that was collected by Lewis and Clark in 1805, made by a Native American woman in this region. It is spectacular. The weaving is spectacular. It was made by a Chinookan woman. And Pat Courtney Gold is a Wasco artist, Wasco is a Chinook band. She was raised on the Warm Springs Reservation. She actually went to the Harvard Peabody Museum and said, I'm Wasco, I would like to study this Wasco basket. And she studied the design and has replicated the style and the weaving pattern in her own work. And she travels throughout the region teaching people long forgotten weaving strategies. I spend some time in the book teaching you about why this canoe is called a Chinup canoe. It may seem weird, but I had to do it because I'm an academic, and even though this is a trade publication, I'm not going to put something out that would be challenged by academics. In academic circles, they decided a long time ago that this was called a Nootka canoe, that it was made exclusively by the Nootka people on Vancouver Island. And I have journals of people who spent time in the 1850s with the Chinook people who described them making this exact kind of canoe. I call it a Chinook canoe, so I wanted you to know why I call it that. This picture was taken in 1910 by Edward Curtis along the Columbia River. So I wanted people to understand that because Portland was incorporated in 1851 did not mean that Native people disappeared from the daily life of Portland. They were around, they were living here. It was a complex, multicultural world. This is a beautiful mural that nobody can see that's hung at Madison High School auditorium, too high for anybody to see it. It was done by WPA artist Martina Gangle Curl that doesn't have the recognition that she should have. She was a Wendy the welder. She worked in the war industry, and she painted the women and men that she worked among in the shipping yards. And this is her depiction of the pioneers as they had to ford the rivers. And this is her depiction of the pioneers and the Native people living side by side once they came. So I wish those would be out and displayed. Then Charlotte Terwilliger. You've been on Terwilliger Boulevard or been stuck on the Terwilliger curves on I-5. Her family is who it was named after. She came here when she was 3 years old, and that's her with her grandson. That's a weird picture, but it's the only one I have. Women at that time, if they were civically minded, they joined everything in sight. And so she was in the Pioneers Association, the Sacagawea Statue Association, and the Portland Women's Club. And the heirs of the original Terwilliger claim gave the land that became Terwilliger Boulevard in 1909 and was designed by the Olmsteds. Her brother wrote in the Oregonian, they did a lot of Remember the Good Old Days articles. And her brother wrote that when their family was growing up out on the Terwilliger claim, that they only had Indians who lived nearby as playmates. There were no white children living close enough to be playmates. And that they spoke Chinup jargon as almost a first language, because that's how much they used it on a daily basis. Chinup jargon was used from Northern California to the Yukon territories. It had mostly loan words from the Chinook people around these areas, and also some French and English and other native languages thrown in there. Had 500 words, so it was a pretty quick language to pick up. Everybody spoke it in Portland. You could not get away with not speaking it, you couldn't function. And it was to the point where the Pioneers Association, even up until 1910, were still having meetings conducted entirely in Chinook jargon, because it became a way to prove your pioneer cred. We got out here first, and we speak the jargon. And so even in some of today's old Portland families, I've interviewed them, and they still have some Chinook jargon words that still function in their families. So if you've ever used the word muckety-muck or muck-a-muck, that is a Chinook jargon word that has entered widely into the English language. In Chinook jargon, it means the person with the most food, who at that time would have been the chief who was the richest. So it has come to mean the person who presumably has a lot of money and is a little too impressed with themselves. And then, of course, the Grand Ron has put out the dictionary, and they're doing everything they can to keep the Chinook Wawa, because the native people called it Chinook Wawa. The pioneers called it jargon, alive. So we have black pioneers that their history is overlooked, and in addition to that, the women black pioneers are even overlooked more. A lot of histories of Oregon, if they barely mention Sidna E.R. Francis, who was A.H. Francis's wife. They ran a mercantile store and a boarding house on Front Street, and they were in Portland from 1851 to 1860. But if they mention her at all, they call her Linda. For some reason, I think people couldn't read the old-timey cursive writing. So my book has I looked up the census records of everything I could find, because I wanted people to see her name was Sidna E.R. Francis. And the reason it's so definitive, in addition to the census records, is because she wrote for Frederick Douglass's newspaper. She and her husband were very big in the abolitionist world back in New York before they immigrated to Portland. So there was so much trade going on, I wanted you to physically see it. So I excerpted some of the ads that appeared in the paper that talked about selling the beads and the trinkets and the metal items that would have been traded for labor or salmon or something like that. And I found this photo in the Oregon Historical Society, and I about fell over, because this woman is holding a box of beads that she found in her grandmother's attic in a house that was once owned by a man, Indian Dave, that they called. So these beads were most certainly the direct line from when they were first used as trade items in Portland. So in the Progressive era, from the 1870s to the 1920s, the most important person in this chapter is Abigail Scott Duniway, and so I showed a lot of, the banner of her newspaper, a poster of her giving a lecture, her business card that she handed out. People called her the mother of Oregon of equal suffrage. She was also very involved at the national level as vice president of the National Women's Suffrage Association. But she died. She worked so hard, and she died 5 years before the 19th Amendment granted women the right to vote in 1920. Dr. Esther Cole Lovejoy was the National American Woman Suffrage Rep, and she was a leader in many suffrage groups. She was the first graduate of the University of Oregon Medical School to practice medicine, the first woman to lead a major city's health department, and she ran for Congress in 1920. So if we knew about them running for office, we put it in there because we wanted people to see how many times people had to try before they actually were successful at getting into office. This was the 1912 suffrage lunch wagon. So they went around the Rose Festival and handed out sandwiches to people along the route and a little pamphlet of information about why they should vote give women the right to vote. Because it was the men who were voting to give women the right to vote. So they were trying to get through their stomachs, I guess. This is a very important book, and I don't think it's been properly explored. I hope people continue exploring it after our book. Eva Emery died, and this rare picture that not many people have seen, Norm Goldston, of course. This book that she wrote, The Conquest, really tried to capture what it was like for Sacagawea on the trail when she was with Lewis and Clark, and really turned her into a heroine, and pointed out that she got the right to vote on this important trip that they did. And this was taken up by the suffragists, the suffrage leaders across the nation as an icon. Because women, one of the lines that was frequently used was, well, if women are given the right to vote, they will neglect their home responsibilities with the home and the children. So the fact that Sacagawea did everything Lewis and Clark did, but did it with a baby on her back and got a chance to vote, helped sort of explain that issue much better. So the Sacagawea Statue Association I was really shocked when I stumbled across this. This was, as they were planning for the Lewis and Clark journals, they put out information about the plans, the Lewis and Clark Expo in 1905, but before that, as they were planning for it, they put out publications about what they were up to, which countries had agreed to give exhibitions and that sort of thing. And they featured this. These were the images that were sent to Alice Cooper, the sculptor. And this is, I couldn't believe, but I'd never seen a picture of her. I also found this picture in the same Lewis and Clark Expo journals. I didn't have her in the book because she's not from Portland, and there were too many women to include. But these pictures were sent to her as a model for the Sacagawea statue that is currently in Washington Park. It took about 2 weeks of work, and I just scrolled through old stereoscope views until my eyes went dry, and hoping that my memory would trigger some of these. And eventually I found that they were by John K. Hilliers, and he took these photos on the John Wesley Powell's 1860s and 1870s expeditions through the Grand Canyon. So they were women from the completely wrong part of the country. However, I'm really proud of the Sacagawea Statue Association for trying to find an image that they could send to the sculptor so that it would be after a Native person. This is the day of the unveiling at the 1905 Lewis and Clark Expo. It was brilliant marketing. They wrapped her in an American flag, and they had important leaders there giving speeches and talking about how patriotic she was and how incredible this story was. It was quite spectacular. When the women's clubs were being formed, they were white only, and so they were very exclusive in a way that would be shocking to us today. So African American women had to form their own clubs to fight for the right to vote. There is actually a much better copy of this image at Oregon Historical Society. I didn't use it because it would have cost me $75, but I also didn't use it because I liked the tape across it. I like that this was preserved. Somebody treasured this and kept this for years, and I thought that was really special. And it took a lot of work to try to find out what these women's names were, because they're all listed as Mrs. Such and Such. This is the Jewish women's group that was very active in equal suffrage. Each of the groups were working in their own silos, and that was actually part of the problem of why it took so long in a way. This is the Chinese suffrage group, which is, this is an incredible article. College equal suffragists, so that would be a white woman's group. And the Chinese women dined together. Celestial, so that was a term that was used for Chinese people at the time. Celestial speaker thanks her American sisters heartily. What she actually did was remind the people in the room that China had already given women the right to vote and encourage America to follow China's lead. So, I love this picture. It's a hard one to see because it's just a grainy photograph from a newspaper. There's one woman in the picture. Can you find her? Right over there. I'm not sure, but I believe that is Lucy White because she was the Ladies Garment Workers Union president, and she was listed as having gone to this meeting of the State Federation of Labor. And she was the representative as the secretary and the treasurer of the board. So I'm pretty sure that's Lucy White there. Lucy White talked about how people literally dropped from exhaustion because there were no maximum hours that you could be worked. There was no minimum wage you had to be paid. So women and children, because they were the cheapest labor, would often drop from exhaustion on the factory floors, and they would have little rooms to take them to recover and then put them back to work as soon as they recovered. So she worked very hard for that. This is a great, I wanted to show everything in Oregon. I didn't want some generic picture of women working in a laundry somewhere. This is in Oregon. This is a laundry in 1935 on Northeast Flanders. Sarah Evans is incredibly important. I wanted you to see the way it showed up in the paper. And, it was a whole feature on 100 men of the Oregon century, and she was included as one of the men. I thought that was great. She was the first public market inspector and worked very hard on the various women's clubs. And she was also incredibly influential in getting the Sacagawea statue. I love Dr. Maria Quee. Good. I love her. And she was in a Boston marriage, which was the way people of refinement described a lesbian relationship. She was an abortionist, a reproductive health doctor. She, at a time when it was actually illegal to teach women how their bodies worked and how to manage their reproductive process by simply giving out a pamphlet. She spent time in jail. She spent time in jail for giving an anti-war speech. She believed that we shouldn't go into World War I. That was considered an act of sedition, and she spent time in San Quentin because of that. So she's a rock star, and we should all know more about her, and I want to promote Michael Helquist's book because it's a good one. So this picture, in the beginning when I had the collage up there and you saw Abigail Scott Duniway signing the Equal Suffrage Proclamation in 1912, I didn't know that this picture existed or I would have put it in the book. So anyone here who wants to help me ID these people, I'll tell you who I know for sure. So this is Dr. Maria Quee. This is Dr. Mary Thorkelson. This is Dr. Viola Coe, whose house this is in. And of course, Abigail Scott Duniway. I believe that's Louise Bryant. And the rest are a bit of a mystery. So my goal is to ID the ladies here, and if anybody wants to help me with that, I'd be very eager for your help. Okay, women in World War I and World War II changed everything. Women were, in both wars, were treated as, you should certainly think about getting into the workforce because the men are off at war. It changed how women functioned in their daily lives. There was a group called the Navy Yeomanettes. It was Yeoman F, but when people slurred it together, it sounded like Yeomanettes, and so then that nickname stuck. So these are Portland women who are going off to serve the Navy. They were either sent to Washington or the Bay Area. That was typical. The Women's Service League was a way that women were involved in World War I. And their theme was for God, for country, for home. They would collect books, as the woman on the left is doing. They would plant every square inch of land to try to get food. In both wars was considered growing more food was your patriotic duty. Canning food. These were ways that you could help defeat the enemy. And they would also send flying squadrons of women to be dance partners at Fort Vancouver because the guys were passing through town and they needed to entertain them, so they would send them out to dance with them. I've spoken to Bill Hawkins, who comes from a very old Portland family, and he remembers his elderly aunts still reminiscing about the good old days. And he said they had a little too much of a gleam in their eye when they talked about that, about going to see the boys over at Fort Vancouver. So this is a very cool thing that they did. They called it Uncle Sam's Canning Kitchen. They gleaned any bit of food they could find on fruit trees around town, people's gardens around town. They would go into the country and go through farmers' fields again to glean as much as possible. And they would routinely produce 15,000 quarts of fruit in 5 months, and that would be sent to veterans hospitals and to Navy and Army military facilities to help out in the war effort. During World War II, the U.S. entered the war December 7th, 1941. The day that will live in infamy, what is that day? Pearl Harbor. So that's what inspired us, even though the war had been going on since 1939. Portland shipyards were hugely productive and a huge part of life, Portland and Vancouver shipyards. The shipyards in our area produced 1,614 Navy vessels. That was a lot of labor power. This was what President Franklin Roosevelt called the great arsenal of democracy, and women were a major part of that. Vanport was where a lot of the people who were, they sent recruits all over the country to come and work for the war effort, and they needed to house them. There were 42,000 residents and 6,000 were African American. It was actually quite impressive, the kinds of corporate benefits that Kaiser gave. Kaiser had on-site medical facilities, on-site grocery stores, child care centers, schools. When the women dropped their child off at the child care center, when they picked up the child, they could also pick up a fully prepared meal made by the people who worked at the child care center that day, because Kaiser wanted them to be freed up to work as much as possible and not have to worry about that. The grocery store sold foods of convenience foods that we would consider normal today, but were not normal at that time. So it changed literally the way we feed our families. And these were allowing Kaiser to be as productive as possible and pumping out as many ships as possible. This is an incredible picture, a war hero, and I'm just struck by this woman. And so I'd seen a lot of different organizations use it before, but of course Norm Golston had the original newsletter that it came out in, The Voice of American Women, in which we discovered that this war mother, Mary Carroll, decided to work in the war effort when her 27-year-old son was reported missing in the Philippines. Portland recruiters went door to door in Portland, convincing women that a woman's place was in the factory. Of course, when the war was over, they convinced them that the woman's place was back home. There was national propaganda saying things like, can you use an electric mixer? And you can learn to operate a drill. And so it was a huge push to get women into the workforce. These are the various jobs that women held at just one of the shipyards. This is my collage of many different newsletters. The newsletters were to encourage the women, make them feel proud of the work they were doing. They were meant to educate the women on how to operate a drill and other things. But it's really quite spectacular to look at some of the language that they were using and really making women feel proud of doing gritty, hard labor. And this was, to me, it was really striking. I just pulled all the pieces out that I thought were striking and put it in kind of a postcard form. Woman power in the 3 Kaiser shipyards. It's a man's world, or is it? I just thought that was, you know, it's amazing how much the propaganda was convincing women, this is your place. This is Ninny Mae Locke. Tanya March, if she's here, is Tanya here tonight? Tanya's been doing tons and tons and tons of work on both Vanport and Gowds Lake and convincing some of the families who live there to give their photographs to the City of Portland Archives, which then becomes available for free use for anyone in the city, and they often post them online. So it's really the kind of work that not that many people know she's doing. President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 8802 forbidding discrimination based upon race, creed, color, or national origin in defense industries. That meant that people of color could work in the defense industries, but that didn't mean that they had equal pay or that, you know, they weren't given some of the worst jobs. It was not exactly a rosy picture. Another executive order was 9066, signed in May of 1942. In Portland, what that meant was that 3,676 Japanese residents were forced to the International Livestock Exhibition Center, which they renamed the Portland Assembly Center. They laid plywood down over cow manure and put up partitions, and they gave the people there the ability to just do a little busy work to keep them busy. One of the things they could do was to work on the Evacuzette newspaper. And you see the women who are working there too. They were not allowed to write about the war or to protest the conditions of their internment for the Japanese people there. But they wrote about the life of the people that were at births, engagements, things like that. In September of the same year, they were shipped to internment camps in Idaho, California, and Wyoming. And if you go today to the Interstate Max Line, the very end of the Max Line is at the Expo Center, which is the same thing as the Portland Assembly Center. That was where it was. And artist Valerie Otani created 5 large torii. They're Japanese gates meant to mark a sacred place. And she has the metal pieces hanging from the top, and they're meant to illustrate the ID tags worn by the people there. And there are bronze steamer trunks scattered around. And it's really spectacular. And this is one of the Easter eggs in my book, because that's my family. I also photoshopped a Max train into the picture because I thought it needed more action. Post-war to contemporary women. So Vanport was destroyed May 30th, 1948, and they were told that day, remember, the dikes are safe at present. You will be warned if necessary. You will have time to leave. Don't get excited. What they actually had was 35 minutes to escape as a berm, a railroad berm, collapsed. They were quickly and cheaply made homes, and they just floated away. So the folks who were escaping the incredible floods were desperate to find housing. These are people waiting right after the flood for assistance at Swan Island, which was set up as a place for people to go. One of the places people were housed was at the infilled Giles Lake to the north of us in trailers. One of the trailer's rent was $35 a month. These women are of the Giles Lake Tenants League, and they're protesting at City Hall because of proposed fare hikes on the buses. Lillian Tingle was the director of the YWCA's Portland School of Domestic Science. She was an Oregonian columnist on domestic science issues, and I've excerpted some of those. I really liked the "Let the Men Do It," and I also liked that fat should be deep enough to let the fish swim, because she's instructing you on how to cook your fish properly. Because that's what she did. She was teaching people how to cook and clean and have a sanitary home with well-made foods. And then she was later the head of the University of Oregon's Department of Household Arts. This is just a charming picture and story. Geraldine was in the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. And she was with the Racine Bells, who were featured in the 1992 movie A League of Their Own. And so it's just a charming picture, many charming pictures and stories. Verdell Burdine Rutherford was incredibly important, and her husband Otto, in the civil rights movement in Oregon. She was the NAACP secretary. He was the president in the 1950s. And the 1953 Civil Rights Public Accommodation Law probably wouldn't have ever succeeded without their tireless advocacy, and then they were incredible historians and kept so much, and that is now at the PSU archives, which it's an incredible gift. The Civil Rights Public Accommodation Law failed 17 times. It outlawed discrimination in hotels, restaurants, and recreational facilities, and finally passed in 1953. Tilly Sussman, or Zeus, as her husband nicknamed her, was the belle of the ball at the Desert Room. And the Desert Room was where you could get anything you wanted. And it was the height of the criminal element in Portland. The girls' dancing shows were considered so scandalous that they had to be pre-approved by the Portland Vice Squad. And Tilly reigned over the place until it closed in the 1970s. It is now the McMenamins Crystal Hotel's Zeus Cafe. It was named after her because that's how you pronounced her nickname, Zeus. And her image is in the logo. So whenever you're at the Crystal Hotel, this is who it's about. She was the grand dame, how do you pronounce that? Dame of Portland's very scandalous nightlife. In 1980, there was a proposed subdivision across from Multnomah Falls, and that would have marred the view of the falls. And this inspired Nancy and neighbor Russell, who is pictured here, the Friends of the Columbia Gorge, the Portland Garden Club, and John Yon to fight for the Columbia Gorge National Scenic Area Act, which was finally signed by President Reagan in 1986. And we all enjoy that today, the spectacular gorge. So up until this point, I've been going chronologically, and it was really hard to lay this book out and decide who to put where. So we decided that the last two chapters would be chronological, but in themes: women in the arts and women in politics, just because we had so many women to cover. I found this in a newspaper article, and by the way, you can go digging around in historical newspapers through Multnomah County Library and find treasures like this. The Oregon Camera Club was very welcoming of women, as you can see in the top illustrations showing the people out taking photographs. That there are a lot of women in this picture. Two of the most famous members of the Camera Club were Lily White and Sarah Ladd. They were also had quite a reputation nationally as well, and a lot of their work is featured in Pacific Monthly. This is Lily White, and one of her images, Doug Magadans at the Architectural Heritage Center, has several Lily White photos that he allowed me to use. Sarah Ladd and White would travel up and down the Columbia River on a houseboat that was outfitted with a darkroom and would take photographs along the way, so there are many images there. Elisha Marcus was very active in the Mutual Art Association. She exhibited in 1890 at New York's National Academy of Design, and she was prominently featured in the 1905 Lewis and Clark Expo, and many Portland households have her pictures hanging in their house to this day. And she painted a lot of scenery of Mount Hood and other natural things. Perhaps the largest art piece we can all enjoy is Timberline Lodge, which was the WPA project number 1101. And the person in charge of that project was Marjorie Hoffman Smith. And she was recruiting the artist who drew the paintings, who made the fabrics from scratch, who did the metal work and the giant woodwork that you see out there today. Beverly Cleary has sold 91 million books, and many of those are based in Portland neighborhoods. And it's incredible. You can still take walks through some of the neighborhoods and see the houses still standing and the buildings she talks about still standing. Laura Foster has written a fantastic book about walking with Ramona that will help you on a guided walking tour so that you can see the places that she might have written about in Henry Huggins, Ribsy, and Ramona the Pest. She was named by the Library of Congress as a living legend. The other author we have in Portland who was also named a living legend is Ursula Le Guin. You can also see the beautiful sculptures at Grant Park that depict her characters. Thelma Johnson Street was an artist and a dancer. She did a mural that she called Death of a Black Sailor that drew KKK threats. She assisted Diego Rivera on his San Francisco WPA mural called Pan American Unity, and that's this one. That's her working on it right there. And her works are in the National Museum. This one up here is of African American History and Culture, the new museum in Washington, D.C. This one is at Reed College. And her work is just now being kind of rediscovered, and she's had a couple of exhibitions just featuring only her work. Women in politics. So, one of the quirkiest characters we have, Gracie Hanson. I felt like it was a bit of a slam to the very serious and wonderful and hardworking women who were elected later. But this was the first person who her first woman who ran for governor in 1970. Gracie Hanson was very famous for having a very bawdy and X-rated dancing show at the Seattle World's Fair. And then she took her show on the road and came to the Hoyt Hotel in Portland and was here for a little bit. And she inspired Darcel's shows. So if you've ever been to Darcel, some of his costumes and jewelry, some of her costumes and jewelry are actually Gracie Hanson's. She was quite a dramatic lady. She talked about how she's had her eye on the governor's seat for a long time and things that the newspapers just ate it up. Our first congresswoman was Nan Wood Honeyman, and she also served in the Oregon House of Representatives and the Senate, and she worked to repeal prohibition. So there were a lot of women who were in prohibition clubs to fight for prohibition, but then there were also people fighting against prohibition. One story to tell you that Lucy White, that was in the labor picture, She says when she first got to Portland, she couldn't believe the men staggering drunk down the street, having thrown up all over themselves and wet themselves, and the smell was terrible. Drinking was just out of control. The men would often get their paychecks and then just go right to the saloon. So prohibition was seen as a way to protect women and children. So it was an interesting time. She supported the Bonneville Dam and the New Deal. No-Sin Dorothy Lee was Portland's first mayor, and she helped clean up brothels and gambling houses, and we had quite a reputation for a lot of vice, and she helped clean that up. Beatrice Morrow Canaday was the first African-American woman to graduate from an Oregon law school in 1922. First African-American woman first African-American to run for office in Oregon and as a state representative. She was a founder of Oregon's NAACP, the editor of The Advocate, and she challenged racial discrimination in public schools, in Oregon laws. She challenged the KKK, and she protested the racist film, The Birth of the Nation, which was a quite controversial one in the area. These are the first two women who were ever elected to office in Multnomah County, and that took as long as 1974 to happen. Jewel Lansing and Alice Corbett got elected in the same year. And the final picture, this is Governor Barbara Roberts, first woman governor. It took 34 34 governors for her to get there. She was the Secretary of State before that, the first woman majority leader in the House of Representatives. And this is in the PSU archives. And I love, this is from Governor Roberts' personal collection. And this is what she wrote on the side. The morning after. And I just thought that was adorable. So. All right, so if you want to continue the conversation, follow me on Twitter and Facebook. And all of my books are for sale tonight, and all the proceeds from all the book sales will go to Women at Transition Projects, which has an emergency shelter for women and then a transitional housing facility for women. Zadie, you want to come up and we'll ask questions? Any questions? Any questions? Yes.
About 2.5 years.
So this started, it was going to be Zadie's project. It was all by herself. And then it became clear that this was huge, absolutely over the top, enormous. And I didn't want to get in on her action, but I said, I think my publisher would be interested in this, and would you feel okay with me joining in? And she hugged me and cried.
I was instantly like, you know what, it's your project now. Congratulations, it's yours.
No, I wouldn't let you do that. Yes?
Well, it seems to me there should be another book or two coming that your publisher does not limit you to a number of words you can write. It doesn't be like a regular book rather than just photographs and captions. Should be in order for many of the periods. Any thought on doing those things?
Well, I definitely agree with you. It's kind of ridiculous. It's only 75 words per caption, especially when you have to sum up the whole one's life in one caption. For some of them, we were allowed to go over because we didn't have enough space. So, but it's not very much more. So I think. Yeah.
Okay, so the problem is time. There are not enough hours in the day, and I make $1 a book. And so these, if I had 2 or 3 assistants and I could just pump out book after book after book. Yes, much more needs to be done. My problem is I have so many projects to work on that it's hard for me to just find the space. So I desperately want to write the book on the forgotten Native American history of Portland, and I've got a book to write on Native American art of Oregon, and so There are not enough hours in the day, but you're right. But you still get a lot of history packed in here, even though it's only 75 words.
Yes, do other cities have such books? Like Seattle or San Francisco?
Well, this publisher has over 3,000 of the sepia-toned, old-timey people covers around the country. I'm not aware of, I mean, a lot of people create sort of, the best of or Morgan's famous women or that sort of thing. I chose a really old-fashioned title, Notable Women. Is a very old-fashioned way of talking about it. That I don't think other people are quite doing that. But I don't know, the research around it. Daniel?
Yeah, two questions. One is, is there any attempt to try and create like some sort of preserve one of these as historic home? Because in some ways, compared to, let's say, your Goose Hollow book, it's a lot more dislocated from place. So, I mean, in terms of the material stuff, is there a chance of a possible museum on this topic or something?
Well, that would be a great idea. What I tried to do in the book was, if I could show you a picture of something today, I took it. And there are gorgeous statues honoring the Wendy the Welders in the war industries in Vancouver. There's a gorgeous statue of a Native American woman on the Renaissance walk along the Columbia River in Vancouver. Portland needs to do a better job at commemorating some of this history in its public art. Vancouver's actually doing a much better job than we are. Wait, back to the back.
Hey Tracy, it's me, Heather. Hey, do you do the creepy thing I do where you look up these women's old Portland addresses and then you use Google Street View to like lurk around where they used to live?
I do not do that. I should. That sounds awesome. This is Heather, and Heather's written several food history books. Portland, a food biography is a great one. And Sherry, did you have a question?
Yes, I was wondering about this history being taught in the public schools here in Portland.
None of it is taught. I'm in the public school system. None of it's taught. I mean, I was barely even taught about Abigail Scott Duniway. I only knew very vague facts about what she did, what she stood for, and I would never have ever known any of this unless I had researched the book. So I definitely think it should be taught, but as of now, it is not at all.
You can guest lecture if you just reach out to different history programs. Yeah, you won't get paid, but...
I've actually called on, because my passion is changing this Eurocentric narrative about Portland's early history. And I've actually called Portland Public Schools, sent emails, didn't get any response. I've gone to Salem and talked to people about changing it. Because I have Native ancestry, but I don't have Oregon Native ancestry. My research is often dismissed as not, authentic, I guess.
Tracy, the Portland Art Museum has what they call suitcase tours of Native American art. They bring Native American art in suitcases basically to show to school children, and it would be cool if you could join forces and you could lecture a little bit about early Native American history along with those artifacts that they're shown.
So I've been a member of the Native American Art Council at the Portland Art Museum for over 10 years. They have spectacular Native American art wing. A lot of what they're teaching people and a lot of the pieces they have are actually from British Columbia and Alaska. We do an excellent job teaching British Columbia and Alaska Native art. We do not do an excellent job teaching Oregon Native art. It's slowly changing. I've tried and tried. I've tried to say, why are you selling things made in China crap in the gift shop? Why don't you buy from Oregon's native artist? And it just seems like not enough people are yelling. But yes, I would love to get in on that. All right, thank you so much for coming out today.